When looking to buy land for development, it's important that you look for off-market land. The reality is that if you go on to the likes of Rightmove, Zoopla, Prime Location, those types of websites, or estate agents' windows, you'll certainly find land for sale, but it's unlikely that you're going to be able to make it stack up. The reality is it's generally overpriced. If it's a good piece of land, then there's probably a lot of competition for it. Whereas when you look for off-market land, then you're able to be perhaps the only person in the room looking at the land, speaking to the landowner, and you're able to then lay out what the value is of that site. So it's very important that you attach that fundamental. I speak to a lot of people who say that they can't get land to stack up when they are looking for development, or that they find the profit that they're obtaining from development is very poor. And it really comes fundamentally down to that. They're paying far too much for their piece of land. And so that's kind of really important. And what I would really like to do just first, before we just talk about going and finding land, is understanding what the equation is. So within development, there tends to be two profit centers. And again, a lot of people don't necessarily understand this. There is the build profit. And so the build profit would come in when you have a piece of land that has full planning, has everything in place, has building control regulations, everything in place. You could buy it on the Friday and you could start work on building out the site on the Monday. So that would be the build profit. So everything you make from that point on would be build profit. Now, of course, as I've just said, you're unlikely to be able to find land that's got all those things in place and be able to achieve even that build profit. The second area is on the land development profit. So this is where you take a piece of land that has no planning in place and you convert it into a viable building site, and that is by getting all the permissions in place. Primarily, planning permission is the big one, because once you've got that, that's a subjective decision. You may or may not get it, and there's lots of ways to mitigate that. But the second thing is that when you go then on to satisfy building regulations, you will get it. You just need to satisfy the regulations. So that's a much more objective decision. So when you look at land, and if you just take agricultural land as being the lowest value of land, typically 5, 10, 15,000 pounds an acre. It fluctuates a little bit, and depending on what part of the country is, but it has a fairly low value in terms of development land. And when you gain planning permission on that land, you get a huge uplift, and that's called planning gain. And so there's a profit there, not necessarily that land is only valued at the 5 to 10,000 pounds an acre, but it's certainly not worth the amount of money that it will with planning permission in place. So there's a profit gain there to be shared between you and the landowner. You, as using your expertise as the developer in order to gain the planning permission, should be at least being compensated for the risk that you're going to take in that. And again, there's ways to mitigate that risk, and then to actually make the profit out of that. So you should be able to share in that. And there is plenty of money in there, but a lot of people don't understand that, and they think that money should then go over to the landowner when they were the ones that actually achieved the planning. So if we look at just a site, and let's just take a site and just say that we're going to build, for simplicity, it wouldn't be laid out like this, but just say 4 houses. We look at the average valuation in the UK of houses is somewhere around about the 280 to 310 mark, depending on which month of the year that you actually look at the historical average. So when you take that, and there's an important point here, depending on where you're looking to build, will affect the valuation. So not only the part of the country, but even within certain areas. So you'll appreciate that in any given area, there's an area of lower economic value, and there's areas of higher economic value. So when you're looking as a small developer, you're generally looking to move up into the higher price range, because that's going to give you the best return. And so rather than taking the 280, 290 as a figure, you're probably wanting to go somewhere around the 350, 400,000 mark as the gross development value. So the gross development value being the end value, in other words, what it would sell for. So if you've got 4 houses there on your plot at 400,000, you're going to have 1.6 million. So 1.6, oh, missed out a 0 there. And what you immediately are then going to do is to take your build profit off that, which is your 25% of your 1.6 million. So that's going to be 400,000. Which is a very easy equation, because it's just simply 1/4 of the 4 that you are developing there. So that's your valuation in terms of that's your build profit, and then so that's going to leave you with 1.2 million, and then from that you're going to take off your build costs and your development costs. So build costs is the physical structure that you're going to build on there, everything that goes into that. Your development costs is anything that you have to do to the land. So it may be remediation, that would be in terms of gaining your planning permission. All those different permissions would be your development costs, landscaping. So all of those costs, you got those 2 costs, which you then add up, and then you take off that, and that gives you your residual land value at the build profit level. And therefore then what you need to do is you need to make an assessment. What's the land currently valued at, and then what's it going to be worth with planning permission? Well, we know what it's going to be worth with planning permission, because it's the residual value of that. And that's the margin you then play with the land owner in terms of how much you're going to share of that profit uplift and how much they are going to share from that. So before you even start all of that process, you need to understand what the planners themselves are looking for. So you've got to have a bit of understanding of when you actually start looking for land, what is it the planners are looking for in terms of space, in terms of, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So there's a national planning policy. Planning is a devolved power, so there's actually a national planning policy for each of the 4 nations of the UK, and then that is broken down into individual council or planning areas, and they can interpret that law depending on, or that policy should I say, depending on the needs of their particular council. So when we actually teach this, we don't actually teach people what the different policies are. We teach them where to find the documentation and how each council operates, because there's an inconsistency, unfortunately. We don't have a national policy. We have a national policy, but we don't have it at the level that you need to be dealing with. So you need to understand in your local area how planning is dealt with. So in other words, for instance, in my area, when I look at a site, they want a minimum of 2/3 garden ground to the footprint of the house. And when I say footprint of the house, that's not the size of the house, that's the ground floor area. So if you have a 2-story house, then essentially you're looking at double that space. So if we take an area of say 300 square meters, means that we could have a footprint of 100 square meters, but if we have a 2-story house, then we're going to have a 200 square meter house. 1.5 story, probably somewhere around about 150, 160 in terms of the area that you are going to be able to have as the internal area of your house. So There's three areas that we look at in terms of finding land. One is what you call maps, and maps is essentially looking at, you can look at Google Maps, although Google Maps tend to be a bit cluttered. Your local planning authority will generally have some maps. Mostly these are available as interactive maps online. Some of them don't. Again, this is an inconsistency. They don't have a consistent system. If they're on the iDocs system, that's really good because you can actually zoom in. The only problem with planning maps is that they don't tend to show you boundaries. So they'll show you where there are things already in place, but it doesn't necessarily show you the extent of that boundaries. You've got your land registry, so you can look at maps there, and that will also, they tend to be a bit more defined and they do have borders in there. So between those, you're able to then source it. Now there are paid services that you can use, such as Nimbus, which will help you search for land. What Nimbus does, and the likes of those companies, is they pull all the public data that's available and they put it in one place. So it's certainly a much more efficient way of looking for land, but it does come at a considerable cost. Last time I looked, so you're talking about somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 plus VAT for their programs. So and that's an annual payment. So there is quite a considerable amount. They don't actually have complete coverage of the United Kingdom either, so they may not be available. But what we teach people is how to find all that public information. So it takes a little bit longer, but it doesn't come with the hefty price tag. And then the second area is what we call boots on the ground, and this is where you just see opportunities as you're driving around, walking around, cycling, running, or whatever activity you might be doing, and you see opportunities. And again, we teach people how to look at things differently, because these opportunities are not necessarily going to be like just a big open space where you can say, oh, that makes a viable proposition. There's lots of different nuances there in terms of what you're looking for. It could be like a commercial facility that is no longer has a viable use. But depending on what that commercial facility is, it may or may not get planning permission. So it needs to be you need to be looking at where the residential areas lie around there. So one of the favourites that people think in terms of pubs, but they're actually very difficult to obtain planning permission for, unless it's something that is maybe in considerable disrepair beyond economic use, and you may be levelling the site, and there may be an opportunity then to build out of that. And then the third area that we talk about is hidden gems, and this is just really unknown ways to approach people who may already have some planning but haven't put it on the market. Or it may be other opportunities, such as going to local councils and understanding their policy and the land that they may have not necessarily immediately available, but may be coming available. Or they may have an influence in terms of where new development is happening. So understanding that as well helps you identify where there could be potential sites in the future for development. And so that covers kind of like an understanding of where you're going to look for land and the sort of criteria that you need to sort of understand. Obviously, this is a very short video and I've only really hardly scratched the surface on this. My objective here is not to give you all the information, because that would essentially take several days to give you everything that you're going to need to become a property developer. That's why we run a 3-day course to do that. So But we're taking you through stage by stage in this series of videos, and the next step is contacting the owner. So one of the issues about contacting the owner is a piece of land is not like a house. You don't necessarily have a door that you can knock on. So we're going to talk about contacting the owner in our next video. So if you want to watch that video when it's published, it's going to be on the playlist this side. If you want to watch the last video in this series, then it's going to be on this side. Until the next video, take care, and I look forward to speaking to you then. Bye-bye.